Hi, everyone. The Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So, I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we'll see fully. Okay, so this video is Last Days Prophecy, not much longer. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to talk about was the resurrection of the wicked, because we don't actually hear a lot about that. And so I wanted to talk about that. So I have these verses from First Thessalonians 4. So starting with verse 11, it says, "And to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life and attend to your own business and work with your hands, just as we commanded you, so that you will behave properly toward outsiders and not be in any need. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words." Okay, so I was thinking that, so, we've always kind of looked at these verses and um, seen them as verses talking about like people, like our loved ones that have died in the Lord, and so as a comfort that Jesus is going to bring them back. And I and I'm not saying that that's not true. Like that could actually be the literal meaning, but I think there's a hidden meaning in these verses where when it says that God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep with Jesus, those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. So, um, so I've been thinking about this verse 16 where it says, "And the dead in Christ shall rise first." Well, the dead in Christ could be the tares, okay? Um, and and so what I believe is that there's a group of people that would be the tares, and that they actually um, are going to experience a type of resurrection um, um, at the same time that Jesus comes back. Okay, and really, what I believe is that it's Trump's followers that I consider them the tares, and I think they are going to be the dead in Christ who rise first, because I believe that God is going to use um, the tares on the right to bring judgment to the tares on the left. Okay. And so what I believe is that during this time of Biden, um, the Trump followers have been kind of in like, um, in a type of death, okay, and like quotes around that, a type of death, okay, um, and that, like, and especially Trump because he hasn't been president, and so they're going to be resurrected in a way. So that, and then, so God's going to give him power to bring judgment. Okay. Um, and so I highlighted this part in verse 11 where it says, "Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life and attend to your own business." Because, I wanted to emphasize that you do not want to join the war, the army of Trump followers. Okay. I really believe that God is calling his people to lead a quiet life and tend to their own business and not be so bent out of shape that there's crazy people on the right and crazy people on the left. Um, and, and especially too, like we want to keep following our leaders as much as possible, um, unless we're actually being called to break God's law. we need to obey our authorities, okay, even though they are evil and wicked, and we know that. Um, but we need to have faith and know that God has a plan and He's going to deal with our wicked rulers, okay? Um, and then the other thing, too, is that I've been seeing that the right has been judging the left, and the left's been judging the right, um, and really, as Christ followers, we need to live a humble life and, not be judgmental. And I mean, we want to have good discernment and be aware of the wickedness going in, or, in the world, but we don't want to have this arrogance where we're like, well, I'm better than them. Because that's kind of what I see with the people on the right and the people on the left, that they point their fingers at the other side and they're like, well, we're better on the right, or whatever. So anyways, and so I believe that those who have fallen asleep, so like I said, those who have fallen asleep in Jesus would be the tares, okay, because I believe there was a great falling away with Trump and his signs that he made with the peace deal and quote unquote peace deals, and moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Um, and so when it says God will bring with him, it's like God is going to bring, there's going to be a resurrection of the wicked at the same time that Jesus comes back, okay? Um, and so then it says, we who alive and remain, okay, we're the ones that are remaining, after the great falling away, we aren't the ones that have fallen asleep, okay, in Jesus and rejected Jesus and started following Trump. There are a group of people that are alive and remain that still follow Jesus and are still waiting for his return. Um, or, with the Jewish people, they're waiting for the Messiah. Okay, they're not. I mean, and so there are some Jewish people that are following Trump like he's the Messiah, or Netanyahu, or Biden, or Lapid. But there's some Jewish people that are waiting for the true Messiah. Okay, same thing, wheat and tares. I mean, maybe barley and tares with the Jewish people. Um, so that's what I was thinking. The dead in Christ will rise first. Okay. And so then, so my notes at the bottom, fallen asleep would be a picture of the deluding influence that we read about in the New Testament. And then alive and remain. Okay, so the other thing to think about with that is keep in mind the harvest picture of the wheat and the chaff. And so we'll go over a verse on the next slide or two talking about that. And then where it says we'll be caught up together with them in the clouds, one of the things that we are taught in Revelation is that the harvesters, the reapers, are on the clouds. Okay, so which harvester will you join? Okay, will you be reaped by Jesus the Messiah, or will you be reaped by Trump or Biden? So that was my thoughts about that. Okay. And so let's read about, okay, so this is talking about the harvest picture. This is from Matthew 13. Jesus presented another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went away. But when the wheat sprouted and bore grain, then the tares became evident also. The slaves of the landowner came and said to him, sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? And he said to them, an enemy has done this. The slave said to him, do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, no, for while you are gathering up the tares, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather up the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them up, but gather the wheat into my barn. Okay, so there's going to be this double harvest, okay, when Jesus returns. Okay, he's going to be gathering his wheat, but the reapers are going to be gathering up the tares. at the same time. Okay. And so, um, okay, so I highlighted first there, first gather up the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them up. And so there's also this picture of like the fiery furnace too, with, um, um, this concept of burning them up. Okay. And I think I talk about that on a later slide. But we definitely, I think the fiery furnace picture is definitely a picture of the last days, the return of Christ, because I definitely think that there's a judgment. Okay. There's that expression where it says, like, okay, so we had the flood, and then it talks about the next judgment is going to be fire. Okay. And so, I mean, I believe the flood is really like Biden and his followers, that they're the sea. Okay. They're the, they were the ones that brought the flood. And so that was a type of judgment from God, giving us a wicked ruler. Okay. But I believe that God is going to cause Trump and his followers to bring in this fiery furnace. Okay. Um, as, judgment for people on the left. Okay. Um, and so then, okay, so, oh, well, here's my slide about the fiery furnace. I thought it was later, but it's right here. Okay, so then it says Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. He commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes, and were cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, tied up. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. He said to his high officials, "Was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire?" They replied to the king, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He responded and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. Okay, so obviously this is prophecy, okay, and sometimes it's a little hard to tell exactly what the prophetic shadows in prophecy are, but let me give it a try. And so what I thought was interesting, where it says Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. Okay, so that number 7, that reminds me of, so I have Biden being the 7th king. Okay, so with the furnace being heated 7 times hotter, I think that's a picture of the judgment that we have been under with Biden being president. Okay. And then, and so actually in verse 20, where it talks about tying up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, could actually be talking about that picture where I said that like Trump's followers, are in kind of like, well, they're bound at the Euphrates. Okay, that expression about the 4 that are bound at the Euphrates, I think applies to, like, I think the 4th river is the Euphrates, which I think connects to Biden. And Trump's followers have been bound during this time. Okay. And what's interesting is the men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes. So I'm kind of thinking with this picture of being tied up in their coats and their caps is like kind of this picture of how like your cap Um, and stuff like that would be a picture of like your authority, your leadership position or something like that. So that's what I'm wondering might be a picture of why they're tied up in their clothes. But also too, I think it relates to because I believe that God has blessed the tares, okay? And that, his people are we're the ones that are kind of like the poor, that we haven't been blessed. Like, I didn't grow up like Trump did, where he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Um, um, and so I believe that, God's followers have been, um, like, it's kind of interesting because when you read the story of Jacob and Laban, it talks about how God blessed Laban because of Jacob, okay, on Jacob's account, okay, which makes absolutely no sense in the natural. But if you understand that that was what God was using to grow up Jacob, and then at some point, he transferred the wealth from Laban to, back to Jacob. Okay, well, that's what's happening. That's what's been happening, like for, I don't know, for maybe 40 years or something, that, God's been blessing the tares because he's been trying to grow us up. Okay, but at some point, he's going to transfer the riches from the tares, back to his people. Okay. Um, so let's see. Okay, for this reason, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So I think there's a switching here. Okay. And okay, so the expression where it says the furnace had been made extremely hot, I think that relates to that now we have Biden and his followers have had the fullness of their sin, and so judgment has become extremely hot. Okay. Um, and we'll talk about, what I see as kind of the fullness of Biden's sin. Okay. And so because judgment is really hot, okay, what ended up happening is the men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which would be Biden followers, they are now the ones suffering judgment. Okay, and they're gonna get killed by the flame of this fire. Okay. Um, and let's see. Um, but then what's interesting is, okay, so then Nebuchadnezzar sees four men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire. Um, so sometimes I think that could be connected to the four that are, um, the four angels that are bound at the Euphrates. Okay. Um, but then I really think that this, I mean, it could be both, but I really think too, it's also a huge picture of, well, I guess that could be really true because then it's like Trump and his followers are loosed, okay, and now they're walking in the midst of this fiery furnace, okay. Um, but I definitely also see a picture of like God's people, okay, and so we're the ones that actually come out of this fiery furnace, okay. Um, so definitely a very interesting story. Um, so the other thing I want to talk about is this concept of two Adams. Okay. So in 1 Corinthians 15, we read, if there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. So also it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living soul. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. However, the spiritual is not first, but the natural, then the spiritual. The first man is from the earth, earthy. The second man is from heaven. As is the earthy, so also are those who are earthy. I guess there is no L. And as is the heavenly, so also those who are heavenly. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a moment at the twinkling of the eye. At the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For this perishable must put on the imperishable, and this mortal must put on immortality. Okay, so I really think there's this concept of like the two Adams, okay, in the last days, okay. And, so what I believe is that the two Adams would be like Trump and the Messiah. Okay. And the first man, Adam, okay, he was, um, earthy. Okay. But the second man is from heaven. Okay. So Trump is earthy. Okay. And that would connect to Revelation 12 or Revelation 13, where it talks about the beast from the earth. And the second man is from heaven. That would connect to Messiah. Okay. And so it says the first man, Adam, became a living soul. That would be a picture of the quote unquote resurrection of Trump. Okay. Where he returns. Okay. And then, I think Paul wrote this. He said, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep." Okay. So that's a picture of that deluding influence. Okay. God's people are not going to be under this deluding influence. Okay. But it says we will all be changed, at the last trumpet. Okay. So something's going to happen to Trump followers, and then something's going to happen to Messiah's followers. Okay. At the last trumpet. Okay. And what's interesting, it says in the twinkling of an eye. So I believe that Trump and Netanyahu are the two witnesses. And so when we have this twinkling of an eye, it's kind of this hidden picture that something's going to be happening with Trump. Okay. Um, and then so a similar story would be the two sons of Abraham. You have Ishmael and you have Isaac. Okay. Ishmael was born to the handmaid. Okay. So a picture of the tares. Okay. Isaac was born to Sarah. After Isaac was weaned, Sarah told Abraham to get rid of the handmaid and her son. Okay. What's interesting is that I think it's an angel that tells Hagar. So Hagar like flees. Okay, like she um, despises Sarah, so she goes and flees. Okay. Into the wilderness, and the angel says, "Go back and submit under her authority." So, what I believe is that Sarah is like a picture of America, and then Hagar fleeing would be a picture of like Trump's followers rebelling when Biden became president. Okay. And if they were true followers of Messiah, they would listen to the angel or God's people that said, "Okay, even though these rulers are evil, we still got to submit to the authority." um you know and then I mean also too, like, we still need to do the best we can to have respect for America. Okay. And its rule, its laws and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm thinking is going on. Okay. And Ishmael, that it describes Ishmael being a wild donkey of a man. I definitely think Ishmael is a picture of Trump, and Isaac is a picture of the Messiah. Okay. Um, okay, thief in the night. Now, as to the times and epochs, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you, for you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day will overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. I was going to comment, but maybe I'll finish reading. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and as the helmet, the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but for attaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we will live together with him. Okay, so so I talked about this before. The day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. So I believe that Trump is the thief in the night. Okay, and he's gonna, basically try to come and, steal away from Biden his position. Okay, and um, um, let's see. So while they are saying peace and safety, destruction will come upon them suddenly like labor pains. So the Messiah is going to come at the same time as the thief. Okay. And then it says, for you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So that would imply that there are a group of people that are of darkness. Okay. And then it says, let us not sleep as others do. So there's kind of this hidden prophetic shadow, because it says, let us not sleep as others do. The people that are of the night, they're sleeping. Okay. And so that would connect to that deluding influence, but we are considered to be of the day. And so we are considered to not be sleeping. Okay. But it says, and God calls us to be alert and sober. Okay. Sober. Okay. Humility, sober. Okay. And so it says, for those who sleep do their sleeping at night. So I believe those are Trump and his followers. And those who get drunk at drunken night, I think that connects to Biden and his followers, because I definitely think the picture of Belshazzar is a picture of Biden. Okay. In the book of Daniel. Okay. They're drinking out of the vessels of the temple. Okay. And that's what we have with Biden and his followers, that they're having a great feast, spending America's money, okay, for their agenda, their evil agenda. Okay. So that's my thoughts on those verses. Okay, so peace and safety. Okay, so let's talk about that. Okay, so on October 27th, interim Prime Minister Lapid signs the U.S. broker Maritime agreement with Lebanon. Okay, so I think that was a very important event prophetically. Okay. So in Daniel 11, we read, at the appointed time he will return and come into the south, but this last time it will not turn out the way it did before. For ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So we will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. I was thinking these verses could be a picture of the return of Biden, okay? Because it says at the appointed time he will return and come into the south. Because I talked in my previous video, I think, about the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, and I think that Biden is a picture of the southern kingdom of Israel. So he returns, but it says this last time it will not turn out the way it did before. Okay, so Biden returns, but it's not completely like Obama's term. Like, one of the things is that Biden wasn't able to get the Iran deal back in order like Obama did. Okay. And then the other thing during Biden's term, which is totally different than when Obama was president, is that what I think these ships of Kittim could be a picture of Trump and his followers. Okay. They will come against him. And so that's going to annoy Biden. Okay. And he's going to return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. So with the ships of Kittim is that, okay, so if Biden is the sea monster, okay, like he and his followers are the sea, okay, then Trump and his followers would be like the ships on the sea, okay, they didn't join in with Biden's presidency. They've always been kind of rebellious. They've been kind of like riding above the sea, okay. And then, and so what we have this picture of is, Biden getting angry. Okay. And so what I really think it is that when Biden became president, is he was really wanting, like, he's another person that wants to, kind of like have, people worship him like he's a messiah, like he's some great whatever president. Um, and but he's definitely been very aware of this group of people that don't like him. Okay, and so he's had this anger against Trump and his followers, and if you listen to his speeches, you could see that. Okay, um, and and then so it says he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. So then he, when he came back, he was looking for the people that are in alignment with him. Okay. And so what we saw is that Biden was in alignment with Lapid, who was willing to go along with the two-state solution and the Maritime agreement. So Biden was able to find people that were willing to work with him, to do the things that he wanted to do. And Lapid, the interim, the previous interim prime minister of Israel, was willing to go along with him. Okay. Um, and so it says, forces from him will arise and desecrate the sanctuary fortress. Okay. So we saw that with the Maritime Agreement. It was the Biden administration, because it wasn't like Biden wasn't really hands on with the Maritime Agreement. It was more his administration that kind of worked that through. So it says desecrate the sanctuary fortress, because really that's what they did, is um, they took this chunk of sea land and traded it for peace. Okay, they traded the land, this contested sea triangle in the sea, um, near the border of Lebanon and Israel. Okay, and so the way this deal worked out is that Israel lost this sea triangle. I mean, so if you look at the map, everyone always like draws a straight line into the ocean and says, okay, the people on this side of this line, that's your part of the ocean, and the people on the other side of this line, that's your side of the ocean. Well, that's not what they did with this deal. There's this triangle shape, which really goes, over into Israel's side, and they ended up giving that to Lebanon. Okay. Um, and so then when it says in Daniel, it says, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. I believe that that's what they did with this maritime agreement. Okay. And so now we can look for judgment for these people. Because, well, I guess I should say, because it says, while they're saying peace and safety. So, I mean, they definitely talked about this maritime agreement, like it's going to bring peace and prosperity to Israel and peace and prosperity to Lebanon. But then God says destruction will come upon them suddenly. Okay. And we'll talk about that. Okay. And so what I believe is, so there's been a bunch of abominations. There's been like 3 major ones. Okay. But maybe a few more too. So with Obama, the biggest one that I remember for him is the JCPOA Iran deal. But there was something else that he did too with the UN. It's like UN Resolution 2334. And then with Trump, okay, so what I believe with Trump is that he had his 3 and they connect to the 666. Okay, so the first 6 was on December 6, 2017. That's when he made his announcement about moving the embassy to Jerusalem. His second 6-6 was his 6 peace deals that included the quote unquote deal of the century that he did in 2020, in the year 2020. There was one that he did in 2021, but they were mostly in the year 2020. And then the third 6 of the 666 is I think Trump's peeps that were rioting in the Capitol on January 6th. Okay. So that's what's on. And we definitely saw with the deal of the century that, God was mad at it because, what was it, 7 weeks later was when COVID came. Okay, so we were definitely under judgment um, because of Trump's deal of the century. Because, I mean, it was really dividing the land if you read that. Um, and then on July 14th was when, okay, so I think that's a very important date. I talked about that in my last video. Biden and Lapid signed a paper that mentions the two-state solution. I think they call it a security document, okay? And then on September 22nd, we had Lapid was at the United Nations mentioning the two-state solution. And then on October 27th, so I think this is like the final one. And then now we're going to see the judgment of God. And we've already seen the judgment of God. Because Lapid's already no longer, he didn't get voted in. He got voted out. And I mean, kind of a miracle Netanyahu got voted in. And if you've been following the previous elections in Israel, I mean, Netanyahu had a really hard time getting together a coalition. So it's kind of a miracle that things worked out so well for him this time around. Okay. And so judgment came upon Lapid really quickly for signing this U.S. broker maritime agreement because he gave away some of Israel's land. Okay, for peace. Okay. For peace, quote unquote. Okay. And it never works. You can't trade land for peace. It just never works. Okay. And so just some extra information about these abominations. So on July 14th, 2022 was exactly 7 years after the JCPOA on the exact date. Okay. So that was kind of fascinating. And then on September 22nd, when Lapid was at the United Nations mentioning the two-state solution, that was exactly 2 years after Trump's peace signings, quote unquote, on 9/15/2020 on the Hebrew date. Okay, because obviously it's not September 22nd, it was September 15th. Okay, but the Hebrew date matches for those two things. So that's really interesting. I mean, we read about 2 full years in the story with Joseph and the cupbearer and the baker. Oh no, not with them. The 2 full years comes with when Pharaoh has his dreams after 2 full years. Okay. And then October 27th was 4 years after the Pittsburgh Tree of Life shooting in 2018, where 11 people got killed. Just this terrible synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh in America. And then on the same day, October 27th, there was a Miami Beach building evacuated that was on the same street as Surfside. Okay. So that Surfside collapse that happened last year, I think, was definitely a big 9/11 sign. And so then to have another building evacuated in a similar fashion, reminds us of Surfside. So it's definitely a big 9/11 sign. And then with this Tree of Life shooting, it happened in 2018. If you add that together, that adds up to 11. And so you got the 11 killed, and then you have 2018 matches 11. And so definitely a picture of judgment. Okay. And then, so what's interesting too is that we've seen these abominations connected to the Jewish holidays. Okay. And so Yom Kippur this year, the Biden administration met with the PLO in Washington. So this guy, one of the guys from the PLO came to Washington, and they had a bunch of meetings with him over, the days of Yom Kippur. Okay. And they were discussing the two-state solution. Okay. And so, Biden wants to make friends with the PLO. It's just a nutty thing. Okay. And so I don't know if you remember, Obama met with the Pope on Yom Kippur in 2015. Okay. So, I mean, with Yom Kippur being a very holy day for the Jewish people, to have these people um, kind of doing things on that date, um, is definitely a slap in God's face. Okay. Because, Obama and the Pope, they definitely had this agenda that was anti God. Okay. And then what was interesting too was last year we had Trump saying that his hearts and minds, he was saying, um, he, I think he didn't tweet because he can't tweet. He was truthing, I think. He, whatever it was in 2021, he said his hearts and minds are with the January 6th people, and that was on Yom Kippur last year. So definitely interesting. Okay, and so then this year on Sukkot, the first day of Sukkot, Biden stated that he wants to return to the JCPOA and work toward the two-state solution. Okay, so we made that. He talked about that at the United Nations on 9/21. Okay, so while Sukkot was going on, they were having this big UN meetings or whatever. And then on the third day of Sukkot, Biden had his national security strategy paper, which mentioned two-state and Abraham Accords. Okay. And then during Sukkot of this year was while the Biden administration was working on the Lebanon Maritime Agreement. Okay, so then the seventh day of Sukkot was when Trump posted, "No president has done more for Israel than I have," and he was bashing Jews. Okay, so just a lot of crazy stuff happened during the Jewish holidays. Okay, what else was really interesting about Sukkot is that there's a lot of flooding that happened in various countries during the Sukkot holiday. And so I think I have that on another slide. Okay. And then what was also very interesting about Sukkot, I mean, I definitely think God is there's so much symbolism with the Sukkot holiday. I mean, one of the things with the Sukkot holiday, I mean, that's the holiday where the Jewish people build their booths, okay? And so the booth picture is definitely a very strong picture of like being with Jesus in his booth. But then also too, there's the 70, they do sacrifices that connect to the 70 nations, okay? So there's definitely a lot of symbolism connected to Sukkot, okay? There's definitely a lot of stuff that God's using this holiday to say things, okay? And so it was interesting that in 2020, at the beginning of Sukkot, that's when we saw Trump with COVID and he ended up going to the hospital. And then there was, I call it the Gregorian Sukkot because the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar is the official Jewish Sukkot. But then July 21st, July's the 7th month, okay? And so you would have a type of Gregorian Sukkot, the 15th to the 21st in July. And we saw Biden getting COVID on July 21st at the end of Sukkot, okay? And so I wrote 7777. So we see 4 sevens there, okay, with the July 21st date. So that was kind of interesting, okay? What is God trying to say? You think he's trying to say something? And then, okay, so like I was saying with Sukkot, what I believe is that there's kind of this concept of 3 Sukkot booths, okay? And and so what I believe too is that there's this hidden concept of 3 Sukkots, okay? And I think that phrase time, times, and half the time could connect to these 3 Sukkots, okay? And so what I believe is that like the first Sukkot was like Biden's Sukkot. The second Sukkot would be the Jewish Sukkot, okay, which connects to Messiah. And then the third Sukkot connects to Trump, okay, is what I believe. And so July 15th to the 21st would be that Gregorian Sukkot that I said, like on the Gregorian calendar. And that's when we saw that Biden signed the paper with Lapid on Sukkot Eve. And then on the 16th, he met with the GCC, the Gulf Council, Gulf nations. Okay. Then he had COVID on that last day, and that was the same day they had the 8th January 6th hearing. Okay. So, you want to pay attention when a lot of stuff's kind of happening on, what could be these holidays. Okay. But then we saw in October is the real, on the Hebrew calendar, the Jewish Sukkot. Okay. And, before Sukkot is when they have their Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur holidays too. And so what we saw during Sukkot, during the Jewish Sukkot is when they had the 9th January 6th hearing on the 4th day. Okay. And then, like I said, there was flooding in various countries. And so I don't believe in climate change. I believe that God's sending us, like, he's sending judgment, but he's also sending messages with the flooding. But there is a YouTube channel called Climate Change, and they had a really good video that kind of covered the week of Sukkot, where they showed the flooding in all these various countries and then other weather events. And so I like that channel. I mean, not that I don't believe in climate change, but I like how they do a good job of kind of summarizing the weather events that God's causing to happen in the world, you know, on their channel. So, um, so yeah, so if you want to go check that out, I mean, the flooding has just been crazy around the world. I mean, just like these really massive floods. And it's really kind of sad because they don't really cover it that well in the news, in the American news. Okay. And so that's why, you kind of have to find these other YouTube channels that cover this stuff. Okay. And then, so then what I think we could be seeing in this Sukkot that I think is okay. So what the deal is when it talks about when in the Bible, when it talks about the kind of the civil war in America and Israel, the dividing of Israel into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, you had Rehoboam was in charge of the southern kingdom, and Jeroboam was in charge of the northern kingdom. If I got that correctly, it's in First Kings 12. What Jeroboam ended up doing, because he didn't want his followers to go back to Jerusalem, to celebrate the holidays. So he set up his own Sukkot, okay, and that was in the 8th month, okay. So what I'm wondering is if we're going to see that, where I think Jeroboam could be a picture of Trump setting up his own feast, starting tomorrow, November 9th, because that would be the 8th month on the Jewish calendar, okay. Which, by the way, tomorrow is 11/9, or 9/11 if you're, the way they mention the holidays in Europe, okay, or the dates in Europe, okay. And so I'm wondering if that connects to, so this is what I'm wondering, if that connects to that phrase, time, times, and half a time, the 3 Sukkots, okay. So the first time was Biden, signing this paper, which I definitely believe brought judgment, okay. And the times would just encapsulate all 3 of the Jewish holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And then the dividing of time, and half a time, could be what happens during, what I'm calling Jeroboam's Sukkot. The rabbis teach that. They see that Jeroboam setting up this holiday, he's like setting up a type of Sukkot. Okay. And So what I think with the dividing of time or the half time, I think it's a picture of that, like Civil War or like the dividing of this Red Sea. Um, it's when, I mean, because up to this point, we had the wheat and tares have been growing together. And so at some point, God's going to bring a division. Okay. And, so could that be happening tomorrow? I guess we'll see. Okay. And so with this concept of three Sukkots is also this concept of three Sukkahs, okay? Three booths, okay? And so what I'm thinking is with the story, okay, so we have the cupbearer and the baker get thrown in jail with Joseph in Genesis 40, okay? And they both have dreams, okay? And the baker has this the cupbearer has this dream where he sees three vines in front of him. And so it wasn't until Sukkot this year where all of a sudden it dawned on me like, oh, three vines in front of him. That's symbolic of the Sukkot lulav. Okay, so they shake the lulav on Sukkot. Okay, and there's three branches in the lulav, three, types of vegetation. So what I'm seeing is there's this hidden picture of Sukkot in the cupbearer and baker story, okay? Because then the baker has this dream where he sees three baskets on his head. So I'm thinking the three baskets are a picture of three sukkahs with, okay, because the basket material, like usually you make baskets out of like reeds or some of the material that they use to put on top of their booths would be some of the same material that you make baskets out of. Okay. Um, um, so I'm thinking that's a picture there of like three sukkahs, the three baskets. Okay. We saw Peter in the Gospels mentioning three tabernacles, three sukkahs at the Transfiguration. Peter said, let me build three booths, one for Moses, one for you, Jesus, and one for Elijah. Okay, and and what they say about Peter, that he didn't know what he was talking about. Okay. We have Noah sends out the dove. There's three sets of 7 days with Noah, so I think that represents the three Sukkots. Okay. There's three shofar sounds that they make like on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, I think that could represent the three sukkahs. Okay. And then in Exodus 23, God says, three times your men should celebrate the feast. So there's kind of this concept of like three feasts. Okay. I mean, in Exodus 23, he's talking about Passover, Sukkot, and Pentecost or Shavuot would be the three feasts. Okay, but that would connect to the concept of like three Sukkots. Okay. And then okay, so I got Second Chronicles 7:9. I wrote on the 8th day they held a solemn assembly. For the dedication of the altar, they observed 7 days, and the feast 7 days. Okay. So what I'm wondering is that so the feast, the dedication of the altar could connect to the Jewish Sukkot. The feast 7 days could connect to what I'm calling Biden's Sukkot in July. Okay, and then it says on the 8th day they held a solemn assembly. Okay, so I think that's going to connect to Trump's Sukkot. Okay, because I think he's the 8th king. Okay. So, and then we also kind of see that picture of three booths kind of repeated in, so Jesus with the two thieves, would be kind of a picture of like, okay, so the reason why I'm saying this with the booths is that it's like you go to the booth under the person that you're following. Okay. So if you're a Jesus follower, you're going to want to be in his booth. Okay. You don't want to go be in Trump's booth and you don't want to go be in Biden's booth. Okay. But they are building booths. Okay. and trying to get followers to come with them into their booths, okay? Because they want worship like Jesus has worship, okay? They're false messiahs trying to get followers and to follow them, okay? Um, and so that same, the two thieves and Jesus is repeated with Joseph and two others in jail, okay? The cupbearer and the baker. And then also too, Moses and Aaron and Miriam, a picture of three people, okay? Um, um, and so I talked about this slide in my last video, but just how we saw Ezra was standing at a wooden podium and he had 7 people on his left hand side and he had 6 people on his right hand side. So I think we're seeing this picture of how, Ezra would be a picture of like Jesus in the middle with the Trump followers on the right side and the Biden followers, who's the 7th king, on the left side. Okay, Trump's the 6th king on the right. Biden's the 7th king on the left. Okay, see how that works really well. Okay, so let's talk about this sudden destruction. What we saw is that on October 25th, there was a partial solar eclipse in Israel. Okay, I kind of think God's saying something with the solar eclipses and the lunar eclipse. Okay, what I believe is that the solar eclipse is a sign to Israel, and the lunar eclipse is a sign to America. Okay, so you got to pay attention. And so on October 25th was the solar eclipse. October 27th was when Lapid signed that maritime agreement. Okay, so then just not too much longer on November 1st was when we had the election in Israel. And so then on November 3rd, Lapid, so God got Lapid out of office like really fast. There was fast judgment on Lapid. Okay. And so I'm trying to see if that was like in a week's time. Yeah, it was exactly a week later was when Lapid was conceding. Okay. With the election too, Gantz, who was the military guy, what would you say, security guy in Israel, he also lost his position, and he was part of like supporting this maritime agreement. The security people had to kind of sign off on it, and so he's out. Okay, and he's actually been around for a while. But he's out, and then I don't know how you say this guy's name, Own. He was the president of Lebanon. He is also out. Okay, so he was the one who signed the Lebanon part of the agreement. Okay, and I mean there wasn't anything too fantastical that happened to get rid of him. He was resigning. Okay, but you kind of have to wonder what would happen if he wasn't resigning. Not resigning, he's retiring. Okay, the president of Lebanon. Okay, and so actually what's really interesting, you talk about sudden destruction, all of a sudden Lebanon, their government is just kind of turned upside down. They don't really have anyone to replace their previous president. So you're kind of seeing them suffering some judgment, okay, with their government. And it's not a good thing for Lebanon to have a government that's not stable, because then Hezbollah will come in. Okay, and so then, so then in the second part of the slide, I'm talking about, okay, so on October 27th, like I said, was when Lapid signed the maritime agreement, but I highlighted the U.S. broker, because remember I said that Biden's administration, they worked on this, okay? And so what I believe with this maritime agreement is that we are now at the fullness of Biden's sin, okay? The or the fullness of the sins of the people on the left. Okay. Because I mean, there's just a bunch of stuff that Biden Biden has done that has made God mad. Okay. And so we're gonna see judgment happen quickly. Okay. Um, and so that's why I'm wondering, this total lunar eclipse that we had last night, or this morning, you could really say, the blood moon, um, um, and then now, we have the elections today. So what, is there going to be a strong message sent to Biden? Is he going to lose power? Um, so I definitely think this blood moon is a message. It could be the writing on the wall to Biden, like, you're in trouble, and the elections too can be a strong writing on the wall to Biden. Okay. Um, so that's what I'm wondering. Okay, so then Joel 2:31 says the sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And it will come about that whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be delivered. So I like verse 32, the promise of, so call on the name of the Lord, and you'll be delivered. So we've seen that now. So on October 25th, we saw the partial solar eclipse. The sun turned into darkness, and then we saw the moon turning into blood. Hopefully you've seen one of these blood moons, because it's just incredible to watch. Okay, because the blood really looks red. Okay, during a blood moon. So, um, anyways, and I talked about the man of lawlessness. I definitely believe Trump is the lawless man. Okay, the man of lawlessness. And so in Esther, Esther says to Mordecai, she says, "Go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish." So I think that's kind of a hidden picture of what the lawless people or what the man of lawlessness is going to be doing, is that he is going to um, be kind of like going into the king. I mean, I really think he wants to steal the leadership position in this country. And so the attitude of Trump and his followers are like, if I perish, I perish. Okay, they are like, definitely, ready to, fight to the death. Okay. And so in Mark 13, we read, "The day is coming when you will see the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing where he should not be. Reader, pay attention. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills." Okay. So I think we're going to see someone standing where he should not be. And standing is kind of a picture of ruling, standing in the, um, a picture of leadership. Okay. So, and you don't want to go either left or right. Okay. "You shall observe to do just as the Lord your God commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right or left." Luke 22:24, it says, "And there arose also a dispute among them as to which of them was regarded to be the greatest." Okay, so the disciples were deciding who was the greatest. Okay, not a very godly attitude. Okay, because what does God call us to be? He calls us to be humble. Okay, and so that's what I'm seeing in our day, is that I think we have the right and the left. They're disputing over who's the greatest. Okay. So I think, this is a prophetic shadow that's being fulfilled in our day. Okay, the right and the left are deciding who's the greatest. Okay. And who is the greatest? It's the humble in the middle. Okay. So I talked about this in my last video. Don't go either left or right. Like a good picture of this was the weather patterns. Okay. So the left talks about climate change. The right talks about the deep state is controlling the weather. Okay. You want to be in the middle with Jesus where there's biblical truths. Okay. So the Bible says in Deuteronomy 29, when they see the plagues of the land and the diseases with which the Lord has afflicted it, all the nations will say, why has the Lord done this to this land? Why this great outburst of anger? A very good thing to say, okay? Instead of saying, oh, this is climate change, okay? And then the answer would be because they forsook the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went and served other gods and worshipped them, gods whom they have not known and whom he had not allotted to them. Therefore, the anger of the Lord burned against that land to bring upon it every curse which is written in this book. Okay. And then Numbers 14 says, the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me, and how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst? Okay. What else does God have to do to get your attention? Okay. If the flooding in all the countries is not getting your attention, if the blood moon's not getting your attention, um, what else does God have to do to get your attention? Okay. And then Deuteronomy 26 says, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and with great terror, and with signs and wonders. And then in Acts 2, we read, and it shall be in the last days, God says, I will pour forth of my spirit on all mankind, and I will grant wonders in the sky above and signs on the earth below, blood, fire, and vapor of smoke. So, I mean, I guess if God hasn't gotten your attention, hang on, there's going to be more. So, okay, so one of the things that I want to bring up is I believe that right now we're assembling, or they're assembling for the, okay, I can't say that word, W at Armageddon, and so the other two letters are AR, okay. And so it says, I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and keeps his clothes, so that he will not walk about naked, and men will not see shame. And they gathered them together to the place which in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Okay. So what I thought was interesting, so I think the dragon is Obama, the beast is Biden, and the false prophet is Trump. Okay. Because Trump is, I mean, the reason why I'm thinking he's the false prophet is that, he's kind of acting like, he's doing this, the God has called him kind of thing. And so what I thought it was interesting is that we saw all 3 of these guys in Pennsylvania on November 5th. Okay. What were they doing? They're trying to get followers. Okay. Well, they're trying to influence how people vote, but it's, trying to get followers. Okay. We saw, okay, so in the past, I saw Obama at COP26 last year on November 8th, which is kind of interesting. So that was a year ago. He was saying, stay angry, stay frustrated to his followers. Okay, which is not a Christian attitude. Okay. We had Biden on July 10th was saying, keep protesting to the pro-abortion protesters. Lindsey Graham on August 28th talks about the Ariotes in the street, okay, if Trump is prosecuted. We had Trump retruthing him the next day. We had calls for violence on social media the day after Biden's speech on September 1st. So definitely we're seeing kind of this militant language, being used. Um, and okay, so let's see what I put. Okay, so in Daniel, I put in the end of the Belshazzar story on Daniel 5. It says, "This is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Paris, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians." That same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. Okay, so what I'm wondering is that when it says God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it, I wonder if there's a connection to the election. Okay, numbered your kingdom. Okay, put an end to it. Okay, so we'll see what happens with this election. Okay, um, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Okay, so I think that connects to Trump because I think he's the horseman with the scales because the scales represent like buying and selling. Okay, I definitely think he's the buying and selling guy. Okay, um, but then it says your kingdom has been divided. Okay, so definitely a picture of like civil war. Okay, um, and then what's interesting about it says Darius the Mede received the kingdom about the age of 62. So I found a 62 that connects to tomorrow is tomorrow is okay, so on November 9th is 62 days after Queen Elizabeth died. Okay. So there's a I think I think there was definitely a I think with Queen Elizabeth dying, I think it's a picture of um like um uh like the changing of the guard, is what we saw with her dying because it was just fascinating because she had been queen for so long. And and then it was like all my life we've always called Prince Charles, and so it was just all of a sudden just weird that she died and then he was all of a sudden king. Okay, so definitely a big picture of the changing of the guard. Okay, um and so it's so interesting that it says Darius the Mede received the kingdom about the age of 62. So what changing of the guard are we going to see tomorrow? Okay, 62 days after Queen Elizabeth died. Okay. Um, and so I got this screenshot because I wanted you to see how they're, I mean, they're using this militant language, to talk about the election. Okay, it says Biden Trump rallied troops on eve of crucial midterms. Okay, President Biden and former President Donald Trump headline a frantic last day of campaign Monday on the eve of a midterm election that will shape the rest of Biden's term. Biden and Trump will go head to head on election eve. Biden is set to hold a rally in Maryland, while Trump will be campaigning in a turbulent Senate race in Ohio. Okay. So they use, they're using that militant language. Um, so gallows 50 cubits high. Okay. So in Esther 7, okay, so we read about the king arose in his anger from drinking wine into the palace garden, but Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. And when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he even assault the queen with me in the house?" As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbonah, one of the eunuchs who were before the king, said, "Behold, indeed, the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king." And the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. So I definitely think we're fulfilling these verses in our day. Okay, so it says the king arose in his anger. So I talked about how, Biden has kind of this anger against Trump and his followers. Okay. Um, and so I wrote, is he angry that he couldn't get the Iran deal renewed? Um, angry that they're like, it would connect to that verse in Esther where it says, so Haman like was angry that, all these great things were happening to Haman, but then he was angry that Mordecai was, still sitting at the king's gate. Okay, so, I think that could be a picture of Biden being angry that Trump's still hanging around at his gate, you know. Um, and so then it says the king arose in his anger and went into the palace garden. That's a repeat of Revelation 12, where it says the beast. Okay, I'm gonna go find this. Revelation 12, it says, okay, the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So the rest of her children could be a picture of the Jewish people in Israel, and so, so Biden could be mad at, like the Trump followers in America. And so he went off to Israel, um, to try to, like he's making war with them. Like, um, he's, I mean, he's trying to make a name for himself. So he's like talking to their enemies and he's, trying to get together this two-state solution thing. And then he did this maritime thing, so in a way he's kind of warring against Israel. But then we have Haman here, could be a picture of Trump. I think Haman kind of switches around who he is. Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. So while Biden's been, Biden went to Israel, and then his administration's been working on this maritime deal. In the meantime, they've been, going against Trump with all these, lawsuits and investigations and stuff like that. And so that's how Trump's been spending his time. Okay, kind of defending himself. Okay. But then it says, when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Okay, so I think Haman falling on the couch where Esther was is a picture of like Haman, kind of like raping Esther. And so what I think is, okay, so now that Biden is back from Israel and has done his things with Israel, now God's going to allow Trump to fall on the couch. Okay, so we're going to see how he is going to be raping America. Okay. Then the king said, will he even assault the queen with me in the house? Now here I'm thinking the king can be a picture of Messiah, like saying, okay, so is Trump going to even assault America with me in the house? And then it says, as the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So, I mean, originally I was thinking that was talking about covering Biden's face, because they end up hanging Haman. So, but I think there could be a repeat with Trump. It's a dual fulfillment of these verses. Okay. In Ezekiel, it says, you shall cover your face so that you cannot see the land, for I've set you as a sign to the house of Israel. So that kind of connects to, Moses wasn't allowed to go into the land. Okay. Um, anyways, so then it says, Harbonah, one of the eunuchs, said, hey, there's the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high. Okay, so we got that number 50, which connects to the dividing of time, the 0.5, half the time. So, okay, so Haman built this gallows for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And so I think that's a picture of, we had Biden building this gallows for Israel, you know, with Jewish people that spoke good on behalf of the king that follow God. Okay. Um, and so because Biden has been working on dividing Israel, God is going to divide America in civil war as judgment against Biden. Okay, he's going to end up hanging on the gallows, which he prepared for Mordecai. So if you divide Israel, God's going to divide your own country. Okay. Um, um, and so then the king's anger will subside. So that's how God's gonna, uh, like perform his judgment against Biden for dividing Israel. Okay, he's gonna be hung on the gallows. Okay, um, I mean, I think Biden might actually literally get hung, but also too, I think civil war is gonna break out in America. Because then it says that same night Belshazzar the Chaldean king was slain. Um, and then in Genesis 40 it says he restored the chief cupbearer to his office and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to him. So I think Trump's the chief cupbearer because I mean originally, just like he did, you know, in his previous administration, I mean, he really brought judgment to the left, that was what God was using him for, but then we're going to see when Trump comes back how God is really going to use him to put the cup of judgment into Biden's hand. Okay. And then we're going to see, but he hanged the chief baker. So I think the chief baker is Biden. Okay. So we see a picture of Moses breaking the two tablets. So I think that could be one picture of it is like someone breaking, quote unquote, both America and Israel. But also too, it's also a picture of because the tablets were on the right and the left. Okay. So those two sides being broken. Okay. So, but how Biden broke the two tablets is one with America. He spent all our money. He was fleecing America. Israel, he signed a document that mentioned the two-state solution. He had this U.S. brokered maritime agreement with Lebanon that gives a triangle of sea property to Lebanon, dividing the land, and not in Israel's favor. And then Trump, the way he was breaking the two tablets is he was with America, he was flippant with classified documents. He caused possible security risks for for America. But then with Israel, he had his quote unquote deal of the century, which proposes to divide the land. He was sharing Israel's security secrets. You can read that article here. He moved the embassy and 5 quote unquote other peace deals, which really ended up causing tensions for Israel with their enemies. Okay. So that's my thoughts on that. Okay. This to me was really fascinating to figure this out. Okay. So, I've been telling you that I really believe Trump is the beast from the earth and that Biden is the beast from the sea. You can read about him in Revelation 13. The beast from the earth is the 666 guy, okay? And the beast from the sea, I think, is got a connection to the dragon, who I think is Obama, okay? Well, so what's fascinating about this is that Trump had his deal of the century, which proposed to divide the land, okay? So I think there's a connection to the beast from the earth, okay? So the beast from the earth was the one who was dividing, trying to divide the land of Israel. And then we have the beast from the sea, who I think is Biden. He is dividing the sea property, okay? So fascinating. So maybe that's why they got those titles, okay? I mean, besides for a whole bunch of other reasons, but that was just fascinating to me to figure that out. Is okay, how do we know that Biden's the beast from the sea? Because he was giving away Israel's sea property. And how do we know Trump is the beast from the earth? Because he was trying to divide the land. Okay, I mean, Trump, he actually had people in there measuring stuff, you know, um, in Israel. So definitely interesting. Okay, so November 9th, I'm really looking at that date. Um, why? Okay, so um, it says, go assemble. Okay, so Esther said, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast from me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maidens will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. Okay, so Esther is going to the king, going into the king on the third day. Okay, so is that the third Sukkot? Okay, so on the third Sukkot, is Trump's peeps going to be fighting against Biden? Okay, which is not according to the law. Are they the lawless ones? So so I had 3 different ideas of what the 3 days fasting is a picture of. One is with the Jews fasting 3 days, night or day, is Netanyahu's followers in exile during the time of Biden, and then Esther and her maidens fasting as Trump's followers in exile during the time of Biden. And so I'm wondering about like the 3 days is, so just like 7 is kind of like a number of completion, I think 3 is a number of completion too. And so when you consider Biden's term being 3 days, and I don't know exactly how that works out, I haven't quite figured that out. Just that I think it's a time of completion. The 3 days. It just kind of like with the 7 days. It's just it's showing you a time of completion. And so, and kind of what I think too is that like God's making Biden's time short, so he doesn't get a whole week. He only gets 3 days. Okay, symbolically. Okay. But then another thought I had was, so Jews fast 3 days, night or day. Okay, so because this works out really well. Okay, there was a 3-day war in Israel on the 9th of Av. Okay, which the 9th of Av is the 11th month. Okay, um, um, on the Jewish calendar. Okay, so now we're in the 11th month on the Gregorian calendar. Okay, so November 9th. Okay, so we saw a 3-day war over the 9th of Av in Israel. So are we going to see a 3-day civil war in America starting with November 9th? Okay, that's what I'm wondering. Okay, and then it says, or the other concept too is we had like Jews fast 3 days, night or day. It was kind of interesting, this pattern. There was 3 days from the daylight savings time ending in Israel to their election day. Okay, and then we had that same pattern in America, 3 days from daylight savings time ending to our election. Okay, so kind of interesting. I mean, it could be all of these things. So that's what I'm wondering. So I thought there was something else I was going to say. Oh, well, there's definitely the 9th of Av. There's definitely a connection. It's on one of the coming up slides to Biden going to Israel. Okay, the timing. Okay. What's interesting too about November 9th is, so Biden's birthday is 9/11 on the Hebrew calendar. I mean, so that's not it's actually the 9th month and the 11th day. When you do all the calculating or the converting, from his Gregorian birthday to the Hebrew calendar, I mean, his birthday is actually November 20th. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Anyways, it's interesting how it converts to 9/11. So I definitely think that's a big sign. So, and what's interesting is that his birthday is November 20th, and he if he lives that long, he's gonna turn 80. Okay, well, so I'm kind of wondering, because we have kind of that weird cryptic psalm that kind of talks about like 70 or 80 if you make it kind of thing. Um, so we'll see if Biden makes it to 80 or God brings judgment before that. In Genesis 40, we read about, thus it came about on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. So I won't read the rest because I just read that. So the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, so I'm wondering, third day, does that connect to the third Sukkot? So what's very fascinating about November 9th is that is the 6-year anniversary of Trump being declared the winner in the election against Hillary Clinton. Okay. So then it says he made a feast. Does that connect to Jeroboam Sukkot for all his servants? And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker. Okay. And the chief cupbearer, who I think is Trump, gets restored. God uses Trump and his followers to bring the cup of judgment to Biden and his followers. But he hanged the chief baker. Biden gets hung on the gallows made for Mordecai. On the, I talked about that. And then it says the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Trump and his followers don't remember Jesus the Messiah and try to establish their own messianic kingdom. But also they go to war against Jesus and his followers, is what I'm thinking is kind of what happens after he brings judgment to the left. And I think he goes to war against Jesus. So I don't think he's a smart guy. So, okay, so what other things? Okay, the reason why I'm looking at November 9th is, okay, so it's 11/9. Okay, so if you've been following my videos, I've been looking at every single 9/11 type date on the calendar, wondering what God's going to do. Okay, because it's just so symbolic. Okay, I mean, there's just, like it just shows up everywhere. Okay, and definitely key things happen on either the 9/11 dates or the 11/9 dates. Okay, and so this year, November 9th is Chesvan 15, which is when Jeroboam had his Sukkot. Okay, we talked about that, 1 Kings 12. It is the 84th anniversary of Kristallnacht. Okay. I talked about Kristallnacht in a previous video, but it's the Night of Broken Windows. It's really the start of the Jewish persecution during the Holocaust. Okay. It was a big turning point in the lives of the Jewish people in Europe. Okay. That was the start of their persecution under Hitler. Okay. And what's kind of very interesting too is that the Gregorian date and the Jewish date kind of intersect this year. I mean, I think it might be off just like slightly, but it's really close. Okay. So why do I say that it's kind of slightly off? So yeah, no, I mean, I guess it does match. Yeah, it does match. So anyways, we see that number 84 when it's talking about the widow, when they brought Jesus in the Gospels, when they brought Jesus to the temple, there was a widow, 84 years old. Okay. So I definitely think 84 is a significant number. What's interesting to me about Kristallnacht with the broken windows is that I think Jesus is the door and Trump is the window. So maybe this picture of like, Trump, he doesn't go in the door, he goes in the window. Okay. So the other big thing about Kristallnacht is that, we read in the scripture where it talks about the morning sacrifices and the evening sacrifices. And so I believe that the Holocaust is the morning sacrifices, and then we've been under with COVID and the war in Ukraine are the evening sacrifices, that, get ready for the dedication of the temple. Um, so that's what I believe. I mean, so definitely I think Kristallnacht was kind of the start of, obviously World War II and Hitler and everything was, I mean, they really thought the Messiah was going to come during World War II, and they didn't, and they wondered why. And it was because they weren't aware at that time that God was starting this, like 84-year process, um, to get ready for the coming of the Messiah. Okay. Um, and it just took 84 years. I mean, well, we're not there yet, but I'm hoping it's just 84, so I mean, it's got to be. Um, and then November 9th is also the 6-year anniversary of Hillary Clinton conceding and Trump winning. Okay. What's fascinating is that's the exact same schedule that we have this year. So 6 years ago, the elections were on November 8th. Clinton conceded on the 9th. We have elections today on the 8th. We'll see what happens tomorrow on the 9th. So fascinating to me that there's a repeat of that schedule. 15th Chesvan is, okay, which is November 9th, is 15th Chesvan, is 2 years after the Back to the Future clock lady died. Okay. I believe Back to the Future movie is so highly prophetical that, I mean, when I watch that, it's like there are so many signs in that movie that connect to prophecy. And so I really think that God used that movie, um, to send a bunch of signs. Okay. Um, because not that many people read the Bible, and he thought he could maybe speak to people through the movie. So what's fascinating about that is that in the first movie, okay, so this week from November 5th to the 12th matches the week in Back to the Future. Okay. So Marty went to the past on November 5th. Okay, November 5th was when um, Doc invented time travel. Okay, so what was fascinating about that is November 5th this year was daylight savings. Okay, so I mean, so I actually was watching Back to the Future 1 on November 5th. Okay, and so it's fascinating because there's all these clocks in Back to the Future. And, so while I'm watching this movie, my husband's running around resetting all the clocks for daylight savings time. Okay, so I thought that was fascinating. Okay, this connection with the clocks. Okay, and then so um, and, and so then also in that movie on November 8th. Okay, so November 12th is actually when they have the enchantment under the sea dance. Okay, in the movie. And so there's a bunch of stuff that kind of happens during the week. Okay. And so I think Marty, um, he has his, okay, so Biff is chasing him around the, the city square. And so I think that could actually might have happened on November 8th. Okay. Like people, when they try to calculate it, we got November 8th connected to that. But definitely during the middle of the week. Okay. Um, and so the reason why that's interesting to me is that, so connecting to Kristallnacht being the broken windows, in Back to the Future 2, they repeat that. I mean, there's a repeat of that same event in Back to the Future 1 in the future. Okay, in 2015, Marty goes and he's trying to, get his kid, or, to say no to Griff. And Griff ends up chasing Marty around the square in front of the clock tower. Okay, and so then Griff and his three buddies, they end up breaking the windows. Okay. And so I think that's fascinating, because what I think is that I think we're going to see a repeat of January 6th. And so in the Back to the Future movies, we see an event that happens twice very similarly. And so that's what I'm thinking could be a prophetic shadow of January 6th, of, um, this event in the city square in front of the clock tower, um, happens twice. Um, so definitely interesting. Okay, November 7th was 2 years after Biden was declared the winner. So we're at the 2 full years. Okay. I'm gonna take a look at this. So November 7th, so if you count that, like 7, 8, and 9, 9 could be the third day from November 7th. Okay, November 9th. Okay. And then we have COP27 is going on right now, which is from November 7th to the 18th. Okay, that's their big climate change conference. Okay. We saw Obama last year, who was telling his followers to be angry at the climate change conference. What's interesting about the 27 number is that's like 999. So that's kind of interesting. Then November 8th. Okay, so what we saw is this total lunar eclipse. Okay, November 8th. Okay, so like I said, it's 1 year after Obama was at COP26 saying, stay angry. So we kind of see a repeat of that 8 number with 26. November 8th, and then 26 adds up to 8. But also, there's 26 could connect to like 62 and 26. I always think of like the sixth king coming again. Okay. And it's interesting that that adds up to 8. And then Chesvon 14, November 8th, is 1 year after Brian Laundrie's body was found. So that was a big 9/11 sign. Because Gabby Petito was reported missing by her family on 9/11 of last year. Okay. So that's kind of interesting. Chesvon 15 is the 1 year anniversary of the 100th and 20th day of Surfside. So that, like I said, Surfside was a big 9/11 sign from God. Okay. And then on the 100th, 20th day of Surfside, I think that's when all the that they stopped the searching at 120 days. Let's see. Let me see if I can find this really quick. Without taking up too much of your time. But there was something significant that happened on the 100th and 20th day of Surfside. Well, maybe not something with Surfside. I guess I was just looking on that date last year, thinking something maybe significant would happen. So yeah. Anyways, okay, so maybe that's not that important. So I wanted to mention the recent 9/11 signs. Okay. I see 9/11 signs all over the place. And I just saw a video last night on YouTube where this guy was talking about, he was talking about 9/11, and he was talking about November 8th, but I'm like, well, you're missing it, buddy. One day later is 11/9. Okay. But he has all these 9/11 signs in his life because he's like, 9 years younger than his older brother and 11 years older than some. I mean, just all the 9/11 signs in his own life was kind of interesting. Um, and then, so like I said, the Gabby Petito story was definitely a big 9/11 story. So I wanted to do a video talking about her, like the connection to the angel Gabriel in scripture, okay, because she's got his name, okay. And so it's like little angel kind of is her name. But on November 3rd, her parents were filing a suit against the Moab police, okay. So that story was brought back to the news like really recently. And then and then we had a reminder of Surfside, which was another big 9/11 sign. Okay, the Miami Beach building was evacuated on October 27th. Okay. And this building is the same street as Surfside, might have even been built by the same builders. Okay. And I don't know if you remember when the Surfside condo collapsed, that was when Biden did an infrastructure bill. So I definitely think that was a big sign, big message to Biden, which I'm sure he didn't get. Okay. But the infrastructure of this building fell apart the same day that Biden had this infrastructure bill. Okay. So what's interesting about this Miami Beach building being evacuated was it was happened on October 27th, which was the same day as the Maritime Agreement. So there's a lot of messages that God's sending to Biden, which I'm sure he's not picking up on. And then we saw a big January 6th sign on October 28th. That was when Nancy Pelosi's husband got attacked on his head. Okay. So when someone's head is getting attacked, that's a picture of, like your leadership position is, being threatened. Okay. So that was like the day after the Maritime Agreement. So definitely a big sign that God was sending. So, and they talked about, I mean, whether it is or not, but they talked about the connection on the news to January 6th. Okay, because they thought this guy was similar to the January 6th. The January 6th people were looking for Nancy Pelosi. Okay. And so that was definitely a big January 6th sign. And then so 9/11 or 11/9, in Jeremiah 9/11 we read, I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, and I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitant. So I think in prophecy, I think Jerusalem could be a prophetic shadow of America. I think Judah, the cities of Judah, are a connection to Israel. So that's kind of a scary verse in Jeremiah 9/11. Okay, what's interesting is we're 21 years after 9/11, 2001. That's the big 9/11 event in America. And so 21, so we see kind of that 21, it kind of in the 2001, okay. And so that could be something that God was saying. Okay, we see Lamech dies at 777, okay. So we want to pay attention to 21 numbers. Okay, what's very fascinating is Biden's inauguration is 21 months, 21 days to 11/9/2022. Interesting, huh? And so then I mentioned before about the 9th of Av, where the war started in Israel. July 14th, which is when Biden was in Israel signing that paper with Lapid, okay, to the 9th of Av was 3.5 weeks, okay. So definitely kind of like fast judgment, okay, with the war starting in Israel. Okay, 3.5 weeks. Okay. And then what's interesting too is that, okay, if you take July 14th to 9/11, that was 60 days. And then you have 60 days from 9/11 to 11/9/2022. Okay, so like that would be 120 days total. It does, but it's actually like 9/11's being counted twice, so it's actually 119 days. Okay, so I had this same problem before when I was calculating the riots. I thought they started on day 120 after the deal of the century, but it was really actually 119 days. Okay, and so then it's like, oh, that makes so much sense, because that 9/11 number, um, is really a picture of civil war in America. Okay, or the two towers falling or whatever. So what we have is Isaac was 60 when the twins were born. Okay, we see that 120 number connects to the flood, of Noah, that God was only going to give him 120 days. But then, like I said, it's actually 119 days. So that to me is a big, 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 big sign that we want to pay attention to, because after Trump's deal of the century, exactly 119 days later was when the George Floyd riots started. Okay. So then what is going to happen exactly 119 days after Biden signed this paper with the security agreement with Lapid, mentioning two states, um, so that's why I'm paying attention tomorrow to see what happens. Okay. And then also we see, oh, sorry, I repeated that. Skip that because I moved it up. Okay. So two witnesses. Okay, so we are fulfilling the two witnesses. In Revelation 11, we read about the two witnesses. Like I said, I think Trump and Netanyahu are the two witnesses. And so it says, I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouth and devours their enemies. So if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. These have the power to shut up the sky so that rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying, and they have power over the waters to turn them into blood, and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. So one thing about the two witnesses is that America and Israel are the two witnesses. Okay. And so really with Trump and Netanyahu, it's like the leaders of the two witnesses. Okay. Because like these are the two olive trees and the two lampstands. Like maybe America and Israel would be the lampstands, and the two olive trees would be like the leaders of America and Israel. Okay. And so it says these have the power. Okay. If anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouth. So if anyone wants to harm Israel, it says if anyone wants to harm him, he must be killed in this way. That connects back to Haman being hung on the gallows for Mordecai. Okay, so if you try to divide Israel, you'll get divided. Okay, but there's also fulfillments to. There's definitely a connection to Trump and Netanyahu, because they definitely had fiery speech and they definitely devoured their enemies. I definitely saw it a lot with Trump. Okay, that his fiery speech, caused people to lose like their leadership position, and because Trump has a lot of power to raise up Republicans that he likes and tear down Republicans that he doesn't like. Um, and then it says, these have the power to shut up the sky so that rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. Um, and, so Trump and Netanyahu are shutting off the truth from the real Messiah. Okay, so rain's not falling, which would be a picture of the Messiah. And then it says they have the power over the waters to turn them into blood. They had power over people on the left. Okay, when they were, when they were in power, they were able to put a stop to a lot of the stuff on the left. Okay. Then it says, and to strike the earth with every plague. So the deal of the century that they were both involved in caused COVID. And then there was other plagues that came up too because of judgment for COVID. Okay, when they finish their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome him and kill him. So the beast so 2 witnesses equals Trump and Netanyahu. Beast from the abyss equals people on the left, or Biden in America, Bennett, Lapid and Gantz in Israel. Okay, so making war could connect to battling in an election. The 70th week after the deal of the century, Netanyahu was kicked out as prime minister in Israel. Okay. So the people, so the people on the left, the people that didn't like him, overcame Netanyahu and quote unquote killed him. Okay. He was no longer prime minister. And then it says their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. So you need to look at dead bodies as more of a symbolic thing, okay? They weren't actually dead, okay? But they were dead in power, okay? Those from the people and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. Okay, was that not true that Trump and Netanyahu followers would not let go of their leaders? Okay, especially in America, they would even say that Trump was still president. Okay, or they believed that Trump was still president. They wouldn't. Trump himself didn't concede. Okay, so he wasn't. He didn't allow himself to be laid in a tomb. To put an end to his presidency. Okay, but then even his followers, said stuff like that. Okay, but then it says, and those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another because these 2 prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. Okay, the left rejoiced and went back to their agenda under Biden and fleeced America for their evil agenda. So it's interesting that we have in verse 8, it talks about this great city, which is called Sodom and Egypt. Okay, so we have like 2 names there, would connect to like America and Israel. Okay, but just also that concept of Sodom and Egypt. Okay, where also their Lord was crucified, where Jesus was crucified. Okay, because people didn't remember Jesus. Okay, in America and Israel. Or like in Israel, they didn't remember God, So, okay. And then but it says after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them and they stood on their feet and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. So I highlighted feet because that connects to the feet of the statue of Daniel. Okay. That's the time frame that I think we're in. Okay. And so the 3.5 days. So remember I talked about resurrection of the wicked. Okay. So resurrection of the wicked right to judge the left. Okay, so we've seen Netanyahu's already back. Okay, because Lapid signed this deal. Okay, so 3.5 days. I'm wondering if that connects to 3 days is the 3 events that caused God to want to bring judgment: the Iran deal, the deal of the century, and the security agreement. And then is the 0.5 day is that Biden dividing the sea land and giving in giving it to Lebanon in the Maritime Agreement. Okay, that's what I'm wondering for that. And then it says, and they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." Then they went up to heaven in the cloud. Okay, so remember the reapers are on the cloud. Okay, and their enemies watched them. And in that hour was a great earthquake. So the earth can be a picture of America. So is that civil war in America? And it says a tenth of the city fell. Does that connect to the 10 horns that hate the harlot, which I think are Trump's followers? 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. So remember that Biden is the seventh king. So 7,000 people being killed could connect to Biden's followers getting killed. Okay. And the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. So, God could be using this civil war to get people to repent and turn back to God. And then it says, the second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. So I believe that the first woe, which is the locust, connected to the BLM rioters on day 119. Okay. The second woe was the civil war on the other day 119. Okay. And then the third woe would be Jesus bringing judgment. Okay. To Trump's followers. Okay, so when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. So Trump, Biden, Obama are gathering their armies. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Okay, Messiah's peeps must look to the mountains where their help comes from the Lord. I hope you realize that this election, you're not going to find anyone who's going to help you in the election. You really need to be turning to God for help. And those who are in the midst of the city must leave. Okay, so Biden would be considered in the city because he's the he's in leadership right now. Okay, and so it kind of says must leave. Like, if you are listening to this and you're a Biden follower, you might want to get out of the city. You might want to get out of Washington D.C. because I believe that we're going to see another January 6th. Okay, and I don't think it's going to turn out as well as the last January 6th. Okay. And then it says those who are in the country must not enter the city. So right now Trump's peeps are in the wilderness, until God, quote unquote, resurrects them. Okay. And so it says those in the country must not enter the city. Don't do another January 6th. Okay. But they are. You know that they are. Okay. These verses match the story of Sodom and Gomorrah's judgment in Genesis 19:17. Okay. That exact concept of city, mountains, country. And then it says, because these are days of vengeance. Okay. So Trump's peeps taking vengeance on Biden's peeps and vice versa, but also God's vengeance against his enemies. Okay. So that all these things which are written will be fulfilled. Okay, I'll skip those. Let's see. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Okay, so we're going to see the end of the time of trampling on Israel because there's a fullness of the sins of, so I believe we're at the fullness of Biden's sins. Okay. And so that, the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And so Israel's been trampled on as much as possible, but also America too, seriously. So God's going to allow both his nations to be trampled on until the fullness of their sins. Okay. And then it says to be sign in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth dismay among nations and perplexity at the roaring of the sea and waves. Okay, so like I said, we've seen a partial solar eclipse, a lunar eclipse. Oh, and so they're in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves. So people are wondering about this hurricane in Florida in November because that's unusual. Okay, and so that's it. They actually had rain today on election day, but then it's coming like maybe tomorrow night. And then Also, too, when you say in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, that would be like people wondering about what Biden and his administration are doing, because he's the sea guy, you know. And then it says, men fainting from fear and the expectation of the things which are coming upon the world. Like, people are really worried about this election if you hear people talk, and the language that they use, like, this is the most important election in your life. And I actually heard Obama talking about it like, this election is about who's going to take care of you. Well, that's not true for me, because I believe that God takes care of me. Um, you know, um, and so I don't see the election that way, but that's how people are looking at this election. Um, and then it says, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken, then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud. Okay, so one fulfillment could be Trump coming with his delusional influence. Oh, so the cloud, too, I think also could be a picture of this delusional influence. And they'll see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory, but there's also connection to the reaping, okay? But when these things begin to take place, straighten up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Jesus comes with the thief in the night. Okay. So last video I talked about a lot of key dates. Okay. So I'll just talk about a few. I mean, if you get a chance, listen to my last video, because it was really a great summary of what's been going on. Okay. And how it connects to Bible prophecy. Okay. August 6th was the 9th of Av. Which, okay, on the Jewish calendar, that's the date when two temples were destroyed. They were the Jews were kicked out of England, Spain. What Hiroshima? Okay, I'm not sure why I have that listed there. Oh yeah, August 6th was actually the anniversary of Hiroshima, the nuclear bomb being dropped on Hiroshima. So it's definitely a big, important date, you know. So that's why you wanted to pay attention to what happened on that date. And what happened on the eve of the 9th of Av. Israel started the 3-day war with Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip. Okay. And like I said, that was quick judgment for Biden and Lapid signing that security agreement. And then what was interesting too was that, if you know, they talk about Christmas in July, so July 25th being like Christmas in July, that would make August 6th the type of January 6th. Okay. And what was interesting on that date too was Trump was at CPAC saying we may have to do it again, you know, and talked about the persecution of Donald Trump. You know, that he said like he's the most persecuted guy in the world or whatever. So, and I talked about how Trump, it was the bad report of Trump, and he's Absalom, stealing the hearts of people away from Messiah, but also from Biden, you know. August 8th was the Mar-a-Lago search, okay? So 8/8, okay? And then I wrote, also remember there were 8 January 6 hearings. Up to that point, I think there was only 8. I mean, we've had another one now. There's been 9 total. But, you know, so I see a connection with 8/8 to the 8th king, okay? The 8th January 6th hearing was on Tammuz 22nd. So 22nd is like the 8th day with the holidays, okay? So I already talked about with Gog and Magog. One of the fulfillments is Russia doing their civil war with Ukraine, but also a connection to the civil war in America, North versus South. Okay, and then some promises. The firstborn of the despised wife gets a double share of the inheritance. So Sarah was despised by Hagar. Elisha got a double portion of Elijah's spirits. Okay. And then those who mourn the destruction of Jerusalem will merit seeing rebuilt with the coming of Messiah, Moshiach, Messiah. So yeah, we're gonna see destruction, but remember that Jesus is gonna rebuild it. Okay. rebuild America. Okay. And Israel too. Um, so Sodom and Gomorrah. Now Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. Thus it came about when God destroyed the cities of the valley that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. So Abraham could be a picture of Israel, and well, Abraham's like a picture of the Messiah in these verses, and then Lot could be a picture of America, Christian America. Um, so, and there's messianic shadows with Abraham, definitely. Like God saved Lot because of Abraham, and so God's gonna save us because of Jesus. Okay. Um, so Trump, um, um, let's see, Trump had his deal. So I was kind of comparing Trump and Biden. Had his deal of the century on January 28th. Biden had a security agreement. But that was, that came from my last slide before we had the Maritime agreement. Okay. Um, but I just thought it was interesting that it was day 1335 when Trump had his peace signings on 9/15, and then it was day 668 on July 14th, which is half of day 1335. Okay. Um, so um, some of the stuff near the end might not be completely accurate anymore. So like, because I wrote 2022 8th January 6th hearing. Like I said, now there's 9. I didn't update that. And then 2021 was the second impeachment of Trump. So I'm actually not really understanding what I wrote in there. So take what works and ignore the rest. Okay. And so like I said, we hear Trump talking about his suffering and Biden suffering. They're false messianic figures. I don't think I'll go through this because I talked about it in my last video. But basically, we are currently in a day with 2 messianic type figures. 2 men instead of the Lion of Judah. Standing on 2 feet connects to Daniel's statue where we are. The feet are the end of the prophecy. So that's where we're at. We're at the feet now. Okay. Here's the statue. It talks about the one king, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. I believe that's Biden. He's just going to have a short amount of time. Okay, and then it says, the beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is of the 7, and he goes to destruction. Okay, so the 8th king, causes destruction. Okay, but then we read about in Daniel, well, hopefully I put that verse in here somewhere. So the feet and the toes are a divided kingdom. So that's definitely a picture of Biden's presidency, where it's been divided. Okay. So I think I talked about that in my last video. Daniel 9, it says, he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Okay, so on the wing of abominations. Okay, so what we have is 2 wings trying to divide the land of Israel. So Biden with his Maritime agreement, and Trump with his quote unquote deal of the century. So on the wing of abominations, now that we've had Biden with his Maritime agreement, someone's gonna come who's gonna make desolate. And so I think that's Trump. He will bring desolation. And that's gonna happen until a complete destruction, until God's wrath is, filled up. And then one is, okay, until a complete destruction, one that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. I mean, actually, so I guess the destruction is talking about, so Trump's gonna make desolate, but then God's gonna, the Messiah is gonna bring a complete destruction on Trump and his followers. Okay, so Trump will war with Messiah and Messiah will win, is what I believe happens. And it says he will so in NIV it says he will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. And so I'm wondering if that connects to the 7 presidents. In the middle of the 7, in the middle of Biden's term, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. Okay, so what I think is that Biden's time is short, and then at the end of 2 years after the election, God's going to put an end to people sacrificing and offering up his followers. Okay, which would be cool. Okay, and its end will come with the flood. Okay, but the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for times and half a time during the 3 Sukkots from the presence of the serpent. Okay, so she's nourished, she's following God. Okay, and she's staying away from the serpent. Okay, and the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. Biden's trying to get rid of Christianity in this country. Okay, he's trying to change the fundamental nature of this country. I mean, it started with Biden. I mean, with Obama, and he's finishing it. Okay, they're trying to get rid of Christianity. And they're kind of sort of succeeding. But then it says the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. Okay, so the earth puts a stop to the flood. And so, like I said, Trump is the beast from the earth. Okay, and so we've already seen a fulfillment of this in Trump's first term, but we'll see a second fulfillment when he returns. Let's see. I don't know if there's any new information. We already talked about the cupbearer and the baker. But anyways, here you could see the picture. What was interesting with the second visit to Joseph is the cup was put in Benjamin's sack. Okay, so that would be a picture of like the cup of judgment. Okay. And then so these are just, Trump Tower fire was a picture, a 9/11 picture. What was interesting is that it happened on Nissan 22, which would connect to 2022. The blaze broke out on the 50th floor. Okay, that connects to the dividing of time. Okay. This is the Back to the Future pictures. Marty returns to the mall at 1:33 a.m. So what's interesting is that at the beginning we see Marty in front of this sign that says Twin Pines Mall, and we see this sign change from 1:15 to 1:16. So I thought that was interesting because it 1:15 would connect to November 5th, and then 1:16 would connect to November 6th. So I thought that was interesting because that would be like the beginning of the week. Okay. That I told you that matches the week in Back to the Future. And then, but what's also interesting about 1:16 is that it's 9/11 upside down. Okay. So, is this saying there's a connection with 9/11 to 1335? But also what's interesting is the Lone Pine Mall. It changes from the Twin Pines Mall to the Lone Pines Mall. So a pine gets knocked down. Okay. We also see Doc's watch changing from 1:18 to 1:19 when he's about to send Einstein on his trip. So 11:8 changing to 11:9. So maybe that's showing like the election on 11:8, and then just this connection to 11:9. be showing a change. So definitely, like I said, there's so many prophetic pictures um, in this movie. So we'll have to talk about it in the Messianic kingdom. Okay. And then, like I said, I talked about the two events in the square by the clock tower could connect to the two January 6th type events. Second event is where the windows are broken. Crystal knock. Okay, so out of time. Okay, so if you see the left and the right burning in the fiery furnace, we are out of time. And hopefully you're with Jesus, who is, kind of not connected to time in the middle. Same thing. See of Obama, see a Trump. Hopefully you're on the dry land with Messiah. So it says the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and out of the temple came a loud voice from the throne saying, "It is done." So I'm kind of wondering if the seventh angels connect to the seven presidents. Um, you know, so it is done with this seventh king. Now we've seen the fullness of his sin. Then there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a severe earthquake. No earthquake like it has ever occurred since mankind has been on earth. So tremendous was the quake. It's actually been comparatively quiet in America. Okay, we never really had wars on our land. 9/11 was like the biggest event, and comparatively speaking, it's pretty small. Okay. Like when you see what's going on in Ukraine. Okay. So it says the great city split into three parts. Okay. So three parts connect to the three Sukkots, Jesus with the two thieves. Okay. And the cities of the nations collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. Cupbearer now has the cup. Every island fled away and the mountains could not be found. So that's, so be on the dry land with Messiah. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. Wait for Jesus. Okay, don't follow Trump. Don't follow Obama or Biden. Anyways, okay. So I was thinking there was one last thing that I wanted to say, but now I can't remember what it was. So hopefully you can see how we're fulfilling prophecy. Hopefully you can see why I think not much longer. I think I'll be really, really, really surprised if something doesn't happen. And so the thing is too, I'm not really sure, no one knows the day or the hour. I mean, I think I kind of know the day, maybe. I mean, if nothing happens tomorrow, then I don't know the day. But, like I said, I'd be really surprised if, we got to see what happens tomorrow. But I also don't know, maybe something would happen tonight, but maybe I'm wondering if they're, Trump's going to say something about the election results, or there's going to be some kind of response to the election results that maybe starts a civil war. Because everyone's so on edge, about this election already, and so, I don't think it's going to take a whole lot, but also, like I said, I think it's God resurrecting things, resurrecting the wicked. So hopefully that was encouraging to you. And so I really thank you for listening. And so hang in there, just look, look up for your redemption draws nigh. Just wait for Messiah. God has a plan. Don't join the civil war, because we don't need to. Okay, we just wait for Messiah. Okay, we don't need things on earth to work out. We just wait for God to work things out in the heavenlies. For us. So hang in there. I know life is rough for a lot of people right now because we're under slavery, but God's going to set us free. If you need some encouragement, read the Psalms, because there's so many promises about God delivering us, from our slavery. So thanks so much for listening. So I pray that you're blessed. And hopefully we'll see you on the other side. God bless.